It's weird they don't have like a shade.
Oh, yeah, well, it's just because I think maybe that's like, I'm gonna look, I'm gonna hear it.
We're active. Sabrina, Lisa, can you guys hear us?
Yep, we can hear you guys.
Hey guys.
Awesome. Well,
So,
great. Yeah, we've got a couple of
Sabrina,
folks
did you
here.
see there's like 2 black marks on the, do you guys see the black on the slideshow?
Yeah.
Yeah, I sent you a picture of it.
Okay, I see it. You know what? Let me fix that. I know what happened here. I moved a window over. There we go. How's that?
There. Perfect.
Okay. That's good to know. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah. Hey, how's everybody? Who do we have here?
We've got
Patty.
a lot of folks in the office. Yeah, we've got Patty, Maddie, Kira, Mitchell, Jake, Megan, Andrea, and David.
Awesome. So fun to be with you guys. Amy, do you want to get us started?
Yes. So we've got Lisa and Sabrina here with us. Lisa is with ADU4U, and then Sabrina is with bnbExcellent, and together they've been teaching this class for 5 years. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So we're super excited to learn from you guys today and kind of get a good Airbnb ADU 101. So I'll let you guys take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Thanks so much for having us. We're so excited to be here today. It's always fun to teach the Airbnb 101 class because the information is always fresh. I mean, there's just something always changing with the class, and we like to keep you guys updated. Quick intro to myself. My name is Sabrina Calnan, and I am an Airbnb subject matter and expert. I've been a superhost for over 7 years. I've hosted over 35 properties. I host over 35 properties, I should say. I'm also a hand-selected Airbnb ambassadors. So what that means is that I help new hosts get started with Airbnb, and I help them get started successfully with Airbnb. And I am a board member of the Mile High Host. So just very, very involved in Airbnb. Not only am I involved in Airbnb both personally or professionally, but I'm also personally involved in that I've got my own Airbnb on the back of my home. I have a little carriage house, and then I have another Airbnb property that I rent out for 30 days or more at a time due to the rules and regulations here in Denver. And we'll talk a little bit more about all of that as the class goes on. Just a little bit of housekeeping before I introduce Lisa. Feel free to ask questions. I think we have all of you guys in a room over there, so we can just pause every now and then and have you guys ask questions for us. I think that would work out great, and we're glad to answer those. The class is always better when it's interactive, so please don't hesitate. If any of you guys have experience or insights, feel free to interrupt and fill us in. And then next up, I'll let Lisa introduce herself. Lisa Kerin-Welch with ADU4U.
Hey guys, thanks again for having us. You can also utilize the chat if you are not actually here in the room over there at your office. So my name is Lisa Kerin-Welch. I work for ADU4U. I was their business development manager for months, and I just took on the role of herding cats, which is basically their operations coordinator. We have 18 projects right now in design. The company is blowing up, and this whole ADU conversation is happening now at a national level. I'm sure you guys have heard about it. We need the inventory, we need rental properties, we need middle to low income housing, and it's really, I think, going to play a major role in some of the needs that we need on a national level, especially, what I know is Denver and Colorado. So I've been educating real estate agents for 5-6 years now on how to build wealth using their current assets. I teach a class about ADUs. Sabrina and I teach that together. We're teaching this Airbnb 101 class to you guys today, which will include a lot of information about ADUs. We are practicing what I preach every day, and we are building an accessory dwelling unit in our backyard. We're building the biggest unit that Denver allows. It's going to be 1,000 square feet on the bottom and 750 on top. And we can do that because we have a lot that's 10,000 square feet. So that's super exciting. I'm a member of the Denver Short-Term Rental Advisory Committee. And I was recently, well, actually, it's not recent. It's probably 3 months now. I was selected to be a member of the ADUs in Denver Advisory Committee. And we are working hard to make changes to cut a lot of red tape that Denver has right now to build these and make them easier and quicker to build. So stay tuned for all that. So is this me, Sabs? We haven't done this in a while. Today's discussion and outline. We told Amy we haven't taught in a couple months, so we're a little rusty. Be patient with us. Today, we're going to talk about how Airbnb and VRBO work, the number of short-term rentals, COVID impact, we can't ignore that, increasing regulations and restrictions. We're going to talk about the Short-Term Rental Advisory Committee and an update on that. We just had our recent meeting in May, and some licensing restrictions.
So just a little bit about how it works. So we use the term Airbnb really frequently. Technically, Airbnb is a listing platform. What this class is about is short-term rentals. So short-term rentals are defined as anything that's rented out for 30 days or for less than 30 days at a time. It really doesn't matter whether you're listing the property on Airbnb, Vrbo, Craigslist, whatever you're doing. But the thing that we do need to mention about Airbnb is that Airbnb is really the platform that ended up disrupting the whole vacation rental, short-term rental industry. I mean, there was not a lot in the metro areas before Airbnb showed up. The Airbnb is the platform that brought short-term rentals to your neighborhood. It started out in San Francisco. The founder of Airbnb was renting out an air mattress in his living room in San Francisco, and that's where the name Airbnb came about. Now, Airbnb has since grown larger in revenue than many hotel chains out there. It's a publicly listed company. Everybody knows the name. It's just really changed the way that people have traveled. Now, on Airbnb, you can list an entire home, you can list a shared space, you can list a guest suite. The thing that a lot of people don't realize about Airbnb is that it's not just for short-term rentals, but Airbnb has now positioned themselves where they are all furnished rentals. So even if you're renting a place out for 30 days or more, Airbnb is a great platform to do that. The nice thing about Airbnb that Airbnb did that some of the other rental platforms didn't do until after Airbnb did it is that Airbnb has worked directly with cities and counties to coordinate with lodging taxes. So for example, in areas where Airbnb is very popular, the platform will collect the lodging taxes from the guest for you, and then remit the lodging taxes to the city for you. That's something that Airbnb does here in Denver. So it makes it super easy, super seamless for the host using the Airbnb platform. Just to give you an idea of what a large subject short-term rental is, these are just some counts in a few of the counties here in Colorado, but we have around 8,300 short-term rentals in the 4 major metros here in Colorado. And in Summit County alone, we have about 8,100 short-term rentals. So the massive number of short-term rentals has made it just a huge regulatory issue. Like Lisa was saying, it's really becoming a hot topic these days because we do have a shortage in housing. A lot of people are pointing towards short-term rental as part of the reason for that shortage. I think the statistics and the data show that that's not necessarily the only reason for a shortage in housing, but because it is such a hot topic, because so many people are traveling this way, so many investors are getting involved in short-term rental, it is a big hot topic with regards to the rules and regulations. And we'll go over, a lot of that, not only in the metro areas, but also in the mountain towns today. One thing that can't be ignored, and I can't believe that we are now like almost 3 years into this whole thing, but COVID and how COVID affected the short-term rental market. Short-term rentals are at this point in time now more popular than they ever have been before. We saw travel start to pop back, or we saw bookings on short-term rentals pop back to normal levels as early as June of 2020. Last summer 2021, everyone was hot off of their vaccines. Everyone was traveling like crazy. Short-term rentals came back with a vengeance, whereas the hotels were still down 80% in revenue. And now short-term rental is just a way of life for a lot of people. It's another option for them to travel with that a lot of people would have never considered before. But because of COVID, short-term people started to like the idea of a short-term rental. You're in a private space, you can cook at home, you don't have to go out to restaurants, you don't have a hotel lobby. And that's the reason that short-term rental became so popular. The other reason it became so popular is because all of a sudden everybody had started working remotely. And so people started doing this thing that we like to call the staycation, I like to call it the workcation, where people are traveling and working at the same time. So they started staying for longer periods of time. People were taking a week away from their personal residence, or even a month or a couple of months to check out cities. And short-term rental is really the perfect thing for a longer or extended stay, because you're not eating out in a restaurant every day. You have a bed, you have a couple of bedrooms, you can have an office space and a desk and things like that. So basically the gist of it is, and to make the long story short, is that the whole COVID pandemic really boosted short-term rentals, made them more popular than ever, not only amongst hosts, but also amongst guests as well. And with all of that growing popularity, cities and counties had to respond to all of this. And so here's just a short map. I think it probably misses some things. You know, it changes so quickly that it's hard to keep up with all of it. But you know, these are all of the cities and counties in Colorado where they are working on changing or updating the rules and regulations or starting rules and regulations. And as real estate agents, when you have clients that are interested in these short-term rentals, knowing the rules and regulations, or at least understanding and being able to tell them like that this is not a static thing. This is something that's ever changing, and it's very complicated because the rules and regulations are city by city, they're county by county, they're HOA by HOA. You need to make your clients aware of these things. And that's a part of the reason that we put this class together, is so that we can help you educate your clients on how to make some good investment decisions when they're looking at, you know, buying a vacation rental for themselves that maybe they rent out a little bit, or buying a full-time short-term rental investment.
Yeah, Sabrina and I never thought we would be talking about the mountain towns. I mean, we didn't think that this would touch vacation areas, and it is, and it's a dumpster fire. So be careful when you have clients that are purchasing anywhere in the city. And now, we used to say vacation towns were fine, you know, go ahead, buy properties in vacation towns and you'll be able to short-term rent them. And we are finding that that is not the case. And the reason is because of housing. We have a home in Grand Lake, and there is no affordable housing for the workers. And we are finding that all over the mountain towns. And so they're putting down restrictions and making some changes and trying to figure out what is the answer here. So some regulatory trends that we are seeing, and they, again, like I said, are increasing in Denver and even in vacation towns. So again, like Sabrina said, this is local and ever changing. It's why we've been teaching this for 5 years, and we continue to teach it because the class changes probably on a monthly, if not quarterly basis. Most areas are restricting the number of short-term rentals. The Metro's primary residence is the most popular. So you really want to make sure when you're working with investors that you don't set them up for something that they cannot do. So you want to do your due diligence. Again, most of the cities and towns in the metro areas are making it a primary residence rule to short-term rent. In the mountains, we're seeing a lot of caps and moratoriums. Be aware of HOAs. We hear horror stories about this all the time. Someone buys a home. In order to pay for it, they want a short-term rent out their basement. It's in areas like Highlands Ranch or other areas with strict HOAs, and they cannot do that, and they find that out too late. So again, due diligence. Increased oversight through compliance software. Denver, people are always asking, well, how are they going to know? Well, Denver has compliance software, and they're doing on-site inspections. So it's not something that you can get away with anymore, like maybe you could have 5 or 6 years ago. Denver is going to know what you're doing.
I have a question related to this.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you can speak at all to like the precedents for changing regulations in terms of grandfathering in existing units. Like what's happening in that space and I realize that that's like a big question, but just sort of wondering what's happening currently in Colorado where regulations are changing to units that were pre-existing, like single family homes or things like that.
That's a great question, and it's not hard to answer, really. We are not seeing any grandfathering in. So I think Colorado Springs maybe at some point did that, and Sabrina can speak a little to that. Boulder did it a little bit, but I would not rely on any grandfathering in And we always say that if you're risk adverse in this market, this might not be for you because it's ever changing and evolving. Sabrina, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so we had just a small, and most places aren't grandfathering in because if they, the point of the regulation is to restrict the number of short-term rental out there. And if they do grandfathering in, you know, a lot of places are putting caps on the number of short-term rental out there. So there's not a lot of grandfathering in happening because of that. But one of the things we saw was Colorado Springs changed their primary residence definition and then said that only properties that are primary residence can be short-term rental, but they allowed the ones that had received their short-term rental license under the old primary residence definition to keep their licenses. So that was a big deal. That was the only sort of, like, I would say, impactful grandfathering in that we saw. The other little bit of grandfathering in that Lisa's speaking to in Boulder is that accessory dwelling units that were built under the old accessory dwelling unit code for the city of Boulder are allowed to be short-term rentals for 120 days out of the year, whereas any of the new accessory dwelling units that are built under the new accessory dwelling unit code. An accessory dwelling unit is like a carriage house or like a basement unit or something like that. It's a secondary unit to your main home. None of those are allowed to be short-term rented at all. And so, and they're not, of course, they're not giving any new short-term rental licenses to accessory dwelling units, even if that accessory dwelling unit was built under the old code where it was allowed. So yeah, we're not seeing a lot of grandfathering in. I would say, you know, that is definitely a question that I'm sure your clients are asking. You know, there's been no precedent set for grandfathering in, so I would not expect it. I would just explain to your clients, like, when you look at this investment, be sure that you can afford to keep it or that you feel like it's a good investment, even if you're not able to short-term rent anyway. Do you have an alternative? How would this property do as a 30-day rental? Because what we find pretty universally is that anything rented for 30 days or more doesn't fall under the short-term rental rules and regulations. Now, I can see, like, as time goes on and as the years go on, that perhaps they will start regulating what I like to call these midterm rentals. These are rentals that are furnished, they're rented for 30 days or more. They're typically rented for anywhere from 1 to 3 months at a time. We might start to see regulation there as well. So far, we haven't seen any regulation on that yet. And how do they feel, or would it make a good long-term rental? You know, do they feel like the appreciation makes it worth it if they can't do a short-term rental anymore? These are all questions that, you know, your clients should be thinking about, and you know, make sure they feel comfortable with those expenses of that property if they can't short-term rent that property.
So we'll go back to Denver metro area, the primary resident restriction. So most cities have followed the examples of Denver, Boulder, and Aurora. They implemented the primary resident restrictions in 2017. But here's the kicker, you guys. You might really hate us by the end of this class because it's all about as clear as mud, because there is a different primary residence definition, city by city and county by county. So it's, you got to dig, and you got to, you know, come to Sabrina or I if you really are uncertain. And again, knowing that those things can change, those definitions can change.
Yeah, and the thing that is so difficult about there is there's no central resource for these rules and regulations because they are changing so quickly that there's no reliable central resource for that. And so what I always recommend, or what Lisa and I always recommend in this class, is that when you are helping your clients, or when your clients are researching good areas for short-term rentals, go directly to the city and the county websites to see what the short-term rental rules and regulations are. It's either established through zoning or the excise and licensing departments, or both in most cases. And you can call them directly and just make sure you get the information directly from these places. You can't rely on news articles. Google, they might not be up to date. Maybe, check the political climate of the area. Even though you don't see rules and regulations online on the city and county website, perhaps they're in discussion of a new draft proposal or something like that. So it can be pretty time intensive to research these rules and regulations and really to understand them. So the biggest question that we always get is, well, where can I do a short-term rental? And there are a few exceptions in the metro area. Longmont is one of them. They don't require that it's a primary residence of you're not a primary resident of the property that you short-term rent, but they do require that you are a resident of Longmont, and they restrict the number of short-term rentals on the block. So no more than 2 on the block. Fort Collins and North Glen are 2 places where it's possible. It's really dependent on where your property is located and how it is zoned, whether or not it needs to be your primary residence as a short-term rental. It can't be a short-term rental, or it can be a short-term rental and it doesn't have to be a primary residence at all. North Glen actually does a physical inspection of the property. Wheat Ridge and Arvada are 2 big ones where the rules and regulations have opened up for people recently. Arvada allows investors to license up to 3 short-term rentals, but here's the kicker: they allow you to rent them out short-term 240 days of the year. So basically 2/3 of the year. So as an investor, when you're doing your math on what's the most profitable way to rent out a property, you have to account for the fact that you can't short-term rent that home 1/3 of the year. And when you do that math, you might be surprised to find that maybe a traditional long-term rental is the better way to go, simply because the costs involved with the short-term rental, ongoing costs involved with a short-term rental, are significantly higher than your ongoing costs with a long-term rental. Wheat Ridge is issuing licenses to non-primary residents up to 2% of the housing stock in each district. So Wheat Ridge has an extremely helpful website. You can go directly to their website. You can see which districts have room for more short-term rental licenses and which don't. And they provide you with a map as well. So that's a great resource for you as an agent and your clients as well. Littleton is worth a mention. Technically, right now, they are not giving anybody non-primary resident short-term rental licenses. But when they first came out with the rules and regulations, they were to have 2 types of licenses, one for investors, one for primary residences. And now when you go to their website, they very clearly state in big red letters, we're not issuing any non-primary resident short-term rental licenses at this time. So these rules are ever changing. I will be very interested to see if rules change in Wheat Ridge and Arvada over time. I think, Arvada in particular, it can be a pure investment. Well, same with Wheat Ridge as well. But, the reason that the city of Denver went to a primary residence rule is because they felt that hosts would be more responsible if it was their primary residence. And you're less likely to have a big home being rented out when it's your primary residence. But in Wheat Ridge and Arvada, you could have a 6-bedroom home that sleeps 20 people rented out as an Airbnb. How will the neighbors feel about that? I guess that remains to be seen. So far, so good. Everything seems to be going smoothly. So we'll see how things go. I think that over time, this short-term rental industry has matured, short-term rental hosts have matured as well. And hosts really do understand that they have responsibility to the community to be responsible hosts. So, you know, perhaps that's why cities like Wheat Ridge and Arvada can open up short-term rentals to non-primary residences, because now hosts know how to work with the community in a way that's beneficial to the community as a short-term rental host. Oh. And next up, we'll have Lisa discuss the mountain towns.
Yeah, so we've talked about this a little bit already. The reason, you know, I love, Sabrina always says, what came first, the chicken or the egg? I mean, we need these short-term rentals in our mountain towns for tourism, right? But you can't take care of your tourists if you don't have people to work your restaurants and your little shops and stores and the ski lifts. I mean, there's definitely a shortage. If anybody went skiing last year, the beat on the street was the lines were outrageous because they don't have the workers. So they're really trying to find a solution, and some of them are restricting, they're capping the number of non-owner occupied short-term rentals. We're seeing moratoriums. Some areas are holding off on issuing short-term rental licenses until they can figure out what they're going to do. And then one really cool thing that they're doing is incentives, financial payments to encourage homeowners to convert their short-term rentals to long-term rentals. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that later. So some caps that we're seeing on short-term rentals: Breckenridge, no more than 2,200 non-exempt short-term rental licenses were effective November of 2021. At the time, there were 3,945 non-exempt short-term rentals, and they're taking waitlist applications. So an exempt is 24/7 phone, front desk, and separate security. Clear Creek County is implementing a 4.5% cap, which is 160 units, on non-owner occupied short-term rentals. Residents, of course, are suggesting more apartments and condos to increase affordable housing stock. And, you know, everybody is hoping that that's going to happen in the mountain towns. Aspen voted to cap short-term rentals at 75% of the current count, owner occupied exempt. They're discussing grandfathering in 90-day limits. They're also doing a use it or lose it, so that if you are not using it as a short-term rental, you are going to lose your short-term rental license. Is this me, Sebs?
Yep.
Summit County's doing a 9-month moratorium. They issued that on 5/24/22 with a resort overlay exception. Grand County, where we have a home, has 413 non-compliant short-term rentals and considered a moratorium. It did not pass. The licensing there costs $600. So that's another thing we're seeing is that it's getting quite costly to get a short-term rental license. Crested Butte voted to implement a 12-month moratorium in June of 21. The short-term rentals there are capped at 30% of the housing stock as of 2017.
So another thing that counties are doing is not only are they placing restrictions on the number of short-term rentals, or they're holding off on issuing more licenses, but they are giving homeowners incentives to provide longer term, more affordable housing for people. And so essentially the cities are subsidizing housing. So Summit County is offering 100 owners $3,000 for a 6-month lease and $24,000 for a 24-month lease, and in between as well. Now, if you're going to lease your property long-term, it must be leased to somebody who is living and working in the county. So I live in Denver, I can't go to a homeowner in Summit County and lease for 24 months. So I have like a second home for myself to go to. It is truly for someone who is a resident of that area. And that's what all of these incentives and programs do require. Eagle County has the Mi Casa program, and it's where Avon will contribute 8 to 10% up to $100,000 towards the purchase of a primary residence for people that work in Eagle County. You know, the stat there is that they need an extra 5,900 dwelling units to meet housing demand by the end of 2025 for local employees alone. That is a lot of housing to build up in the next 3 years, and we can say that it's near impossible to make that happen. But we are seeing places, we are seeing resorts build workforce housing and things like that. So, you know, we're working towards solutions. Winter Park is doing something similar to Summit County. They are paying landlords for longer term leases, anywhere between $5,000 and $20,000 for leases 6 to 12 months. So their incentives are a little bit higher than Summit County. And the incentive depends on the size of the property, the length of the lease in Winter Park. Whereas I don't think that stipulation is there in Summit County. So these are some of the solutions that we're seeing, some of the resorts coming up with, so that they can help sustain service levels and hospitality while, you know, really helping people to have a place to live, so that they aren't commuting an hour 45 minutes just to, you know, work in a restaurant or man a ski lift and pay all that money in gas and things like that.
Quickly, one thing to note is that in Grand County, the reason why some of the restaurants are actually surviving this is they are providing living for their workers. And one restaurant that I'm thinking of right now has the whole upstairs is apartments for their employees, and they are surviving this. So that's going to be tricky, but that is helping some of the restaurant owners and stores in Grand Lake. So like I said, I have a seat on the short-term rental advisory committee here for Denver. I have been with that committee, gosh, it was before COVID. So now it's been 2 or 3 years. Some updates there is that recently we did a platform accountability. So Airbnb and the city of Denver have worked together to ensure that everyone has a valid license, and you need to put your license number now up on the Airbnb sites, the VRBO sites, etc. There's a $1,000 fee for booking properties without a valid license. And if you don't have one, Airbnb will automatically move your listing to a 30-day minimum. And this has really worked. The work that Denver has done, STRAC has done, Excise and Licensing, and Mile High Hosts all together has gotten us to a 90% compliant rate here in Denver. Airbnb says that they use us as an example for other cities of how to do it right. And I'm really proud of our work here, and hoping that the mountain towns can do the same thing. A secondary license was proposed to the short-term rental advisory committee, and we loved it. It would be a type 2 license. It would be non-primary. There would be a limited number, only in certain areas of Denver, a higher licensing fee, increased lodgers tax that would be designated funds for homeless, low-income housing. Places like Seattle and Long Beach are doing this. We thought the proposal was beautifully done, and we wanted to research more and see what we could do about that. It went to city council and did not pass. So now that we're seeing places like Arvada and Wheat Ridge allow a secondary license, I'm wondering if this will come back up on the docket in the next year or two. So stay tuned for that, because Denver has always sort of been the city that everyone else followed. And I couldn't understand why this secondary license was not looked into a little bit further, and nor did STRAC. So I'm thinking that's gonna come back around here in the next couple of years. So that it'll be interesting to see. I went the wrong way, sorry, there.
So some more updates is that they are doing on-site inspections. So when you go to get a license or you go to renew a license, they are going to set up an inspection for that. So again, another reason why you can't get away with some of these rules and regulations. Long-term rentals are also going to require inspections starting in 2023, January of 2023. I'm not sure you guys know that, but it will be very interesting to see what happens there. If maybe sort of like back when these rules and regulations were originally made in Denver, we saw some homes go up for sale because you know, they couldn't follow the primary residence rules. So I'm wondering what will happen with these long-term rental homes that do not have things like egress windows, et cetera, that they are going to be looking for. And will they want to put money in to those homes, or will we see some homes that go up for sale? Lodgers tax. We really saw what lodgers tax can do for a city when we went through a pandemic. These numbers are really shocking to me. In 2019, we made $10.6 million in lodgers tax revenue. And during the pandemic, we made 5.6 million, 8.2 million in 2021, and year to date, as of May, 3.5 million in lodgers tax income for a city. So that makes a big difference for Denver, and it really makes a big difference for these small mountain towns.
Yeah, one thing I want to just go back to real fast is the on-site inspection. So at the moment right now, Denver doesn't do an inspection for every single short-term rental out there. What's happening is when you go to renew your license, they're reviewing your listing. And if they see that you're renting out an entire space, they're looking to see if that entire space is a legitimate accessory dwelling unit. So they're looking at things like, well, if you're renting out your basement, is it zoned as a separate unit? Is it zoned as an accessory unit? If it's zoned that way, you know, is it permitted? Are the use permits there? So that is the type of thing that the city of Denver is doing right now. So it's something that you have to be very careful of when you are working with investors that are looking for homes where there's a space to Airbnb, because a lot of times a space has been Airbnb for many years, or someone is advertising the space as a space that could be Airbnb. But when the city goes and digs into it, when that person goes to renew their short-term rental license, they could run into a little bit of a hairy situation where that license then is not renewed. So it's something to make your clients very aware of. You'll want to make sure they do their due diligence to ensure that if they expect a short-term rental property, that they will actually be able to do that.
I deal with this every day with the working for ADU4U, and you have to be, you do it right the first time. I cannot say that enough. Pull the permits, make sure that everything's up to code, because we have people that come back to us who didn't do all of those things. And we have a client right now that, due to all the new rules and regulations involved in short-term rental and ADU, he had to put $50,000 into his property that he had been Airbnb-ing to get it back up to code. And first of all, you have the $50,000, and then he lost all that rental income for the months that it took us to get the property up to code. So this is something we see on a daily basis when it isn't done right the first time.
I have a question regarding the Airbnb spaces. When you were talking about, you know, possibly triggering them coming in to determine whether you have the proper zoning for that type of thing. You know, on Airbnb, you can rent just rooms or parts of spaces. Does that circumvent, I'm not trying to play a game here, but like that, does it circumvent that to a certain extent? Is it only when you're saying it's an entire space?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of bureaucracy, and what's happening is the excise and licensing department doesn't doesn't understand exactly how the Airbnb platform works. So ideally, as a host, you would do everything that you can to list your property as an entire private space, because those are the ones that earn the most amount of money. However, what happens when you do that is that triggers the inspection with excise and licensing here in Denver, because when you advertise the property that way, they are then at that point looking to make sure you have a legitimate accessory dwelling unit. It's something that us as the Mile High host, I'm a board member of the Mile High host. We've been, in contact with excise and licensing, and we've spoken to them about these nuances and how, it's a matter of the way the property is being advertised, but it's still part of someone's primary residence. It's still a safe and usable space for someone to sleep in and rent out. It's not an accessory dwelling unit, and it doesn't have to be. And so there are so many complications that Denver is still figuring out, because Denver is very, very strict with their regulation. Much more, they've taken actions that are sort of, not to the norm of other municipalities and things like that with the inspections. They sometimes do drop-by inspections and things like that, unannounced. And because there is just a lack of really understanding, I think, that platform and how it works and how a host would present themselves to be the most profitable host versus what a property actually is. So to answer your question, yeah, if you do rent it as a private space or a room in your home, yes, that does tend to work out a little bit better for the rules and regulations, but profitability wise, it hurts you in your search results and the marketability of your property.
Just thinking about people who are, doing like house hacking, purchasing homes who have like finished out basements, they need to be really careful about how they're advertising on our Airbnb and whether it's going to trigger these types of things if it's not in compliance with some or those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I would recommend is just being very, very clear somewhere in your description exactly how it's set up, so that the city of Denver can see exactly what you're doing, so that perhaps they understand, like, you're not renting out an accessory dwelling unit, but you closed, and this is a real gray area, but a lot of people will just close off their basement because they have a walkout basement with a door or something like that. It doesn't have a kitchen or anything like that. They're not claiming it's a separate unit or an accessory dwelling unit, but they're advertising it as an entire home rental or an entire space rental. And so, explaining that somewhere in your listing, so you can point to that when excise and licensing starts asking you about it, or hopefully they see it on their own before they do an inspection and take away your license because it's not an accessory dwelling unit.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, Lisa, I think this is the perfect lead in to your next slide here.
So some other updates addressing rules and regulations, Airbnb and accessory dwelling units. Sabrina touched on that a little bit. It is a very gray area, and I don't think that the city quite yet knows what their rules and regulations are. And we find when I'm working with ADU4U that many times you can't get a straight answer from them, or you'll call one office and you'll get 3 different answers for the same question. So what I'm really hoping that this ADU Denver Advisory Committee is going to do is be able to put something out in black and white with exactly what the rules and regulations are in regards to short-term renting and accessory dwelling units. They did a very good job. The Denver website for short-term rentals is really good and comprehensive, and I'm hoping that we get the same thing for ADUs. So some rules here are: the host must live in the main residence
not the ADU to short-term rent. So let me explain that in regards to our situation. So we have our primary home and we're building an ADU in the backyard. So one of the options for us is that we're going to rent out this house and downsize to the ADU. So if we were living in the ADU, we could long-term rent our primary. If we're living in the ADU, we cannot short-term rent our primary. I know, weird. We're looking at this. I don't know if this is going to change, but it's very bizarre. If you're living in your primary, we decide to stay in this house, we can short-term or long-term the ADU. Is that clear as mud, you guys? Do you have any questions? You look like deer in the headlights. It's a bizarre rule. We've talked about it. I don't think this is something that's top of mind for the city in terms of the ADU Denver Advisory Committee, but that's the rule right now. There's a lot of other things that we're working on removing. Minimum lot size, kind of ridiculous. We're working, the actual build and structures around what we can and cannot do. We have a meeting the first Thursday at 4:30 of every month, and you can join and you can find that information and we're going to send all of this out to you in an email following, but all of the information about what has been discussed in every meeting. It's been fascinating and wonderful to be a part of. And I think we're all on the same page on making some really positive changes here for Denver. So for the naysayers, when it comes to ADUs, it's always about, they don't want a short-term rental right next door to them or in their neighbor's backyard. But the data speaks differently. Only 16% of ADUs are currently being used as a short-term rental. So what we're finding is that people might start off that way, and then they get tired of the work that it takes to short-term rent, and they turn it into a long-term rental. But one of the neatest things, and my favorite part of it that I think that these are being used for, is multi-generational living. And lots of our clients are sitting there with their parents who are so excited about the thought that they get to downsize and be close to their family and save $7,000 to $9,000 a month for these retirement homes that really, they actually are affording their children an inheritance because they're going with this option. So those are my favorite clients, and we love that. For my husband and I, we are probably all in. We will spend probably $400K for 1,750 square feet in our backyard. We could never find a home in Denver for that cost. So these people who are always assumed that they would sell their home and downsize in Denver, it just doesn't make sense for Denver anymore. So there's all these amazing ways to utilize an accessory dwelling unit: long-term rent, short-term rent, multi-generational living, downsize, and just really neat, exciting things.
Hi ladies, I have a question about a home that I noticed in my neighborhood. So it appears that the owner is living in the main home. They're having construction, so the basement is being built out to rent that. They also have an ADU being built in the backyard, and it looks like it's 2 separate units for a total of 4 separate living quarters. So what are the rules about that? Would they have, if they're living in a main home, can they short-term rent the other 3 units?
You're only supposed to be allowed 1 accessory dwelling unit on a lot. And in terms of short-term renting, you can only have 1 of those short-term rented out at a time. Right, Sabrina?
Yeah, that's correct. So you can have, to step back 1 second, if the lot, it depends on the lot zoning. So if the lot is starts with an SU, and Lisa can speak to this a little bit more. Only one accessory dwelling unit, but if it's like a row home, zoning or some other zoning, then you might be able to have more than one accessory dwelling unit. But with regards to the short-term rental rules and regulations, the primary residence definition is totally different from like the lending definition of primary residence. So I know that you can buy up to 4 units on a primary resident loan, but that's not how it works with regards to how the city of Denver defines a primary residence. So and I don't know enough about the property to say like whether or not, only the one that they live in will be considered the primary residence, and that's the one that they can rent out. But if not, if it's considered all one property with an accessory dwelling unit, you can only rent out one short-term rental at a time. So the client can have all 3 of the units listed as short-term rentals, but while one is rented out, the other 2 have to either be vacant or rented out long-term, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a complicated situation. And I think with regards to getting the short-term rental licensing, that might be something worth giving excise and licensing a call in advance to discuss.
Well, this is your neighbor, right?
It's someone in my neighborhood. Yeah.
What neighborhood are you in?
In West Highlands.
Well, they've just blanket rezoned the west. No, I'm sorry. Never mind. That's West Colfax. I always get that messed up. I'll look at that a little bit further.
Yeah, West Highlands has a lot of zoning that's super friendly to multiple units on a property.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting. That's a lot of units.
That's what I thought of. Little gold mine going up there.
Yeah, it could be a gold mine unless they're not allowed. Unless they're breaking all the rules. All right, any other questions?
right.
So quick about what my company does, ADU4U. We build modern carriage houses from start to finish. I mean, literally everything. From the rezoning to survey to appraisal to architectural design to mechanical and constructional engineer. I mean, all of it clear through. We have financing, the whole thing. It's been wonderful to work with them on a personal level because we have not had to do anything. And I highly recommend hiring a company who knows what they're doing from start to finish, because probably once a month I get a call from someone who went with a GC. It's been months. They don't have permitting. They didn't see the guy again. He disappeared off the face of the earth, and they're out all of this startup money, which can be, $23,000 out of pocket, and they still don't even have a start to the build of their ADU. So my job with them is for you all to reach out to me. I'm sort of the first point of contact. If you have anyone who's interested in building, or if you have clients that are looking for a property where they can potentially build on. It's tricky to find one that's already built, that is up to code and ready to rent out. We just redid, go to our website, or if any of us are friends on Facebook, I posted on Facebook. We just finished renovating a 1906 carriage house in Cap Hill. It is gorgeous. So some areas like that where there's already an existing building with good bones, I mean, we still had to do a ton of work on it, but that's, a good first place to start is some of these areas that maybe already had carriage houses in the backyard. Not to say that it isn't still going to take some effort, but if you have clients that are looking for a situation like this, really all I need is an address, and I will do all the digging for you and for your client to make sure that it's feasible to build an ADU on the lot that they are looking at. So best way to get me is lisa@youradu.com. Some nice things that people have said about our classes over the years. I can't take all the credit, Lisa. You put on a great class. This was one of the most amazing workshops I've ever been to. Thank you so much. Very informative and useful, very knowledgeable instructors. So we love that good feedback. And if there isn't anything that we're doing good, we love that feedback too. If you can think of anything that we need to add to the classes, any questions that we didn't answer for you, please let us know.
Lisa, if somebody just sort of wants a little bit of guidance as to whether it is feasible on a property, is there like, I'm assuming you can't just do that work for free all the time. Does it cost anything to have that looked into, or what does that cost and how does that work?
Bless your heart. Thank you for asking. I think we are going to start putting together something that people can go to, and it would be a small fee. So that's eventually what we're working on, because I spend, as you can imagine, most of my day doing that work. But right now it's just part of what we do. It would be wonderful, because there is nothing out there that you can go to that shows you all that stuff. I have to, it doesn't take me a long time because I'm used to doing it now, but we are working on doing that. So thank you so much for asking. It'll be a minimal fee. And honest to gosh, once I've vetted them, which does not take much time, they're ready to go. I mean, it's the biggest misconception is cost, but so I'll let you guys know that probably minimally the smallest ADU is going to cost you $250K. All the way up to 400, 450. What?
Sorry, Andrea said, how many square feet was that? Is that?
So the carriage house, the renovated carriage house we just did in Cap Hill that's on our website is a little under 600 square feet, and they landed at $250K.
And is that, so that's working on a building that's already existing, that's not ground up construction?
Yeah, I mean, it had good bones, but you can see when you go to our website what we had to do on this. It was a lot.
I'll reach out to you. I have a property we're considering doing this one.
Cool. I would love that. I work with a ton of agents that are building. And once you've gone through the process, you're just going to be smarter for your clients. And I'm telling you guys, this is blowing up.
Are you in Park Hill, Lisa?
Say that again?
Park Hill.
Am I in Park Hill? No, I'm in Mayfair.
Okay, you're nearby. You're in the, I see you pop into the Park Hill Facebook group often. So I was like, oh,
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah, I'm close. I'm in that vicinity for sure.
Okay.
But yeah, we would love to help you. So I think right off the bat with your clients, ask them, what do you think something like this would cost? And some people I would say it's about 50-50. Some people are very realistic about it. We had a guy come to us last week who had the perfect situation in the basement, but he thought it would cost him 20 to 30K. And there's just no way. I mean, even a basement is going to cost you 100K. We've never done anything for less than 100K. So, and we have financing available, and there's really great options, but I think you can vet your client immediately by just simply telling them what the cost for this would be. It's a small house. It's not a she shed in your backyard, and everything that is included in building a house is included in building an accessory dwelling unit. You ready to go on?
Sure. So switching back to the primary residence definition, this is something that can be pretty tricky. And the thing about the short-term rental rules and regulations is that the definition of primary residence is different depending on the city that you're looking at your rules and regulations in. Denver has one of the most subjective sets of short-term or primary residence definition that there is. So what Denver is doing is they're looking at multiple factors in conjunction with one another, and then it's whoever is reviewing your particular case decides whether or not you meet the requirement for primary residence. So they're looking at things, you know, where are all of your addresses? Do you own other properties in the area? What's your voting registration, your billing address? Where's your car registered? Where does your kid go to school? If you're traveling for more than 50% of the time, and 50% time in the home is what a lot of places use to determine primary residence. Denver technically doesn't have that on the books where you have to be in the home 50% of the time. However, if you are in the home for less than 50% of the time, my understanding and what we're starting to observe is that really does flag your rental application upon renewal, and they start digging into other items. And so if you're in the home for less than 50% of the time, they really want to understand how and why the home is your primary residence, even though you don't spend 50% of the time there. So they're looking at, you know, what's your employment? Do you travel for work? Are you able to work remotely? If you're employed, you know, where's your corporate office and things like that. So it can be a very deep dive into your personal life for the city of Denver to determine whether or not something is your primary residence. They are doing drop-by inspections of properties. We've had a few instances where hosts have mentioned that the city of Denver has stopped by their unit and started questioning guests that are staying within the unit as to whether or not it seems like it's someone's primary residence. So these are all things to be aware of when working with the city of Denver. You know, like I said, Denver has you know, by their point of view, Denver looks at the short-term rental license as any other business license, and they treat it as such. And other business licenses have inspections and unannounced inspections and things like that. Now, there's two sides to that story, and I don't think that a business license requires, you know, that you go and you ask a restaurant patron whether or not they think a restaurant is clean. So that's, you know, an issue that many hosts have with the way that these primary residences are being defined. But it's very complicated, and it's something that you need to make sure that your clients are aware of if they're looking at purchasing a home in Denver and then short-term renting the home as their primary residence. So a couple of things to keep in mind. Accessory dwelling units are allowed to be short-term rented, as we've talked about, but multiple unit properties such as duplexes or triplexes or fourplexes, those are not considered properties that can be where you can live in one unit and rent out the other, because each unit is considered its own primary residence for an individual. So if you own a duplex, you can live in one side and short-term rent the side that you live in only when you're not there, or rent out a room in that side. And you can long-term rent the other side because that other side is not your primary residence, according to the city of Denver. Another thing to keep in mind is that the city of Denver does have one short-term rental license per household per deed. And so you can only have one primary residence. It's something that as you're going through the due diligence process with your buyers and sellers, I would always just ask the sellers to disclose whether or not they have ever had a short-term rental license, whether or not their property has ever been listed on a short-term rental platform. Because what we find is that after the sale of the property, sometimes the city of Denver will flag a property if there's a listing, you know, somewhere out there in the internet and there's an expired license, or your buyer goes to apply for a license, but your seller had a license on the property. So what you want sellers to do prior to the close of the property is completely unlist any short-term rental listings online and surrender any short-term rental licenses with the city of Denver so that your buyer doesn't have any issues afterwards. And your seller doesn't have any issues later on where your buyer is contacting them and telling them that they need to do something. It's just much cleaner if they do both of those things. Any questions on any of that? Okay. So here's the big one. I think that short-term rental has become so popular over the last 4, 5, 6 years because short-term rental is known to be this incredibly lucrative investment. And I can tell you that, yes, short-term rental can be a very lucrative investment. It's great for certain properties. It's great in the case study of a primary residence here in Denver. And I'll just share my personal numbers with you guys because I think it's great to really have a case study to understand. So a little bit about my Airbnb. I live in the West Wash Park neighborhood. I live in the main home. We have a little carriage house on the back of our home. The carriage house is completely remodeled. We took the time to completely redo it about 6 years ago. And it's a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom, about 500 square feet carriage house. And so let's look at the different options for renting out that property. If I'm to rent that property out long-term, rent might be $1,300 to $1,400 a month. Rents have gone up quite a bit, so maybe even $1,500 a month. I'm earning after my costs $15,000 to $16,000 annually on that property. If I rent the property out as a midterm rental, or what I like to call a midterm rental, it's rented out furnished. I pay for, cable, internet, all of the utilities. I do all of the maintenance and upkeep on the property. I rent it out furnished for 30 days or more at a time. I'm renting that unit out for, now these days it's probably going to be somewhere between $2,000 and $2,200 a month. I'm taking home anywhere between $20,000 and $22,000 annually. As a short-term rental, which is the way I use the property, it's rented out for an average of 3 to 4 days at a time. I net after the costs of all of the cleaning, the supplies, just my take home, I'm netting about $3,000 a month on average. So about $35,000 a year. It's double, what I would earn on that property as a long-term rental. So as a primary residence, short-term rentals work really well. And part of the reason that they are so profitable on your primary residence is the additional expenses that would normally cut into your bottom line and your profit are expenses that you would probably have anyway because it's your primary residence. I already furnish my entire property. I already paid for cable and internet. I already make sure that the home is well maintained. The lawn is mowed, the snow is removed, the gutters are cleaned, things like that. All of those are my expenses, regardless of whether I rent out that carriage house or not. So they aren't considered expenses that cut into the profit of that property. Whereas when you have a pure investment property, all of those expenses are expenses that cut into your bottom line. So just a quick case study on your take-home profit. And what I always tell people is a rule of thumb, and it really depends on how much you end up paying your short-term rental manager, is that when you find what your gross revenue on a short-term rental property would be, expect that you're going to take home anywhere between 35 and 55%. Whereas on a long-term rental, you're taking home easily, 75, 80%, maybe even more, even when you're using a manager on that property. So that's the big difference between long-term rental and short-term rental. And so what I would recommend is that, when your clients are looking at places to invest their money, how to invest that money, how to rent out those properties, they should do this analysis. And certain properties, it really depends on the unique property, make awesome short-term rentals and others don't. If you have a property on a resort, you have a ski in, ski out condo in Breckenridge, the absolute highest and best case use scenario for that property is a short-term rental. In my case, I live in a neighborhood that is very walkable. I'm very close to downtown. The property is comfortable enough for 1 or 2 people. It's highly functional. There aren't a lot of like quirks or any weird maintenance things or things people have to do, to make the hot water come out correctly and things like that. It makes a great short-term rental. Whereas if you're renting out a basement unit in another part of Denver that maybe is less desirable for a tourist or a visitor, that might not make sense to make it a short-term rental versus a long-term rental. So these are things that your investors need to consider when they're determining how to rent out their property. And just to take a quick moment to talk a little bit about myself and my company, I've introduced myself. I am an Airbnb expert and guide, and my goal is to help Airbnb investors succeed in their investments. What I find is that when I work with clients, using all of the expertise that I have over the last 7 years, hosting over 35 properties, is that I can help my clients earn up to 75% more income on their short-term rental investments. Basically, what I love to do is I love to share all of the secrets that I've learned over this time with my clients so that they can pick the right properties to invest in. They can set themselves up for success with these properties. And if they need guidance, self-managing those properties, I teach them everything that I do with my 35 properties to make it extremely profitable right away and very efficient for themselves. So I do not, just to be clear, I do not manage short-term rentals for other clients, but I can definitely point your clients to the right direction if that's something that they're looking for. I work with realtors very frequently. I help to make your clients comfortable with their purchase. We can do a pre-purchase consult with them. Once they have properties, I can teach them exactly what I do with all of my properties so that they're successful with those. And what I find, it's a very symbiotic relationship that I have with most real estate agents. Once someone gets the bug to purchase a short-term rental investment and they're super successful with that investment, they tend to come back to me and say, hey, I'm thinking about this property. What do you think? And at that point in time, it's a great time for me to refer them back to you and say, hey, talk to your realtor about this. And so what we find is that once people catch the bug with short-term rental, they tend to want to buy more and more properties. And you get some repeat clients out of working with me and allowing your investors to be really successful with their investments. And so, to sort of wrap up the pros and cons of short-term rental, pros, of course, it can be very lucrative. We've talked about that. We didn't talk about this too much, but I love the short-term rental platforms out there. The Airbnb platform in particular makes it so easy to collect your money. I mean, it is effortless. Airbnb handles all of that. And, in many cases, Airbnb handles the tax collection and remittance for you as a homeowner. I find, that being a short-term rental host is very fun. It's a very pleasant experience, especially compared to being a long-term rental landlord. The guests are upbeat, they're complimenting your space, they're on vacation, they're exploring your city and your town that you're so proud of. They're looking to you as the expert, and that's a lot of fun. The properties stay in really great condition because they're clean from top to bottom between every guest. Whereas with a long-term rental, you're just not able to do that. Your renter is there for 12 months at a time. They don't want to be disrupted by constant maintenance of the property, by you, tightening up that doorknob or painting up that scuff for them. They may or may not clean as frequently as what's needed. A short-term rental is cleaned every 3 to 4 days from top to bottom, whereas a good renter is cleaning once a week from top to bottom, maybe, and many don't do so much. So the non-cleaning puts a lot of wear and tear on the property, and you don't get that with the short-term rental. So the properties stay much better preserved, and that's one thing that I love about short-term rentals is I get to keep an eye on things, and things look nice and they stay in great condition. You know, the cons to short-term rental is it's very time intensive. We actually didn't talk about this, but you know, when you're looking at a turnover on a property every 3 to 4 days, that's a big, you know, you're looking at cleaning, inspections, all of that. That's very time intensive. The other thing is that short-term rentals, this is one thing I always like to make clear in the class. If you're investing in short-term rental, you're not just a real estate investor anymore. You've joined the hospitality and travel industry. So you are, number one, need to be available to your guests 24/7 with regards to, you know, either communicating with people who are trying to make bookings or communicating with guests who are staying in your property. It's a 24/7 thing. Someone needs to be available all the time for that. And then the other thing is that, you know, you're not at just the whim of the real estate industry and how real estate is doing, but COVID really proved to us that as a short-term rental host, it's much more volatile than the long-term rental market. You're subject to travel trends, to hospitality trends. You know, if travel drops, which we're starting to see a bit of a drop now, you know, coming fall, your bookings drop and your revenue drops. So it's not for the person who needs to make like X amount of money every single month, because the truth is you'll make X amount of money 1 month and then you'll make 3 times that in the high season, and you'll make 1/3 of that in the low season. So it needs to be for someone who can sustain some ups and downs. Another con of short-term rental is that there's no tenant screening. The screening is done through the platforms, and certainly there are ways that you can make sure that you've got a better guest in your property. You know, we are very strategic, and this is something that I teach all of my clients with the way that we set up our listings and we message with our clients so that they really understand what to expect and how to behave in our properties. The biggest, I think, is the uncertainty regarding short-term rental and the rules and regulations. What you're allowed to do today, you may not be allowed to do tomorrow. And that comes back to that question about grandfathering in. We just don't see a lot of that happening. So your clients really do need to be flexible with their investments and how they use those. And so, you know, those are the pros and cons to short-term rental. Any questions about anything that Lisa and I have spoken about?
Sabrina, I see people their phones backing up. I'm not sure how much longer your presentation is, but I think most everybody has. Are we almost done, or is there still a bit to cover?
It's time. We're wrapping up here.
Oh, we are. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So I'll let Lisa take it away.
Thanks so much, you guys, for having us. Hope we didn't keep you too long and that you found this information helpful. Here's our contact information, but I'm going to talk to Amy after this, get all of your email addresses, or maybe there's one that for the whole team, I'm not sure. We're going to send you a follow-up email that's going to have all of the resources for all the information that we just gave you. This was probably like drinking out of a fire hose. We are here for you guys if you need us to answer any questions for you or for your clients, and we really appreciate you having us to your office today.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Take care.
You guys are so lovely. Lots of great information. Thank you so very much for spending your time with us.
Have a good one, guys.
Thank you.